Hi there, the end of the year, so we have to talk about trends for the future, and today I would like to tell you about what I believe is the most unnoticed trend coming from China. What is that trend that nobody's really talking about that could change the world? Well, that is the word called common prosperity. And I would like to talk about it because it's unnoticed, because it comes from the Communist Party of China, so nobody really cares in the world, but it's changing society, and we've seen it in 2021 already. I'm going to talk about whether it's going to work, how it's going to work. I'm going to talk about whether it's actually against capitalism and against the rich, or is it for society, and how this is all balanced one to the other. Welcome to this week's Pascal's China Lens. If you haven't subscribed so now, please do so. I'm almost at 50,000 subscribers. We'd really like to get there this year still. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Common prosperity. I'd like to talk about it. Why? Because this is one of the trends you see in China, where nobody really talks about. It's like a hidden trend. But in my view, if successful, it could become the biggest trend of the world. But very few people are mentioning it. And one of the reasons people are not mentioning it is because it originated from the Communist Party of China. It's called Gongtong Fuyu in Chinese. And what it means is really to have that common wealth of China, because China is much more wealthy now than it used to be, shared more with more people. And so that everybody in China can actually benefit from the prosperity of China. It's a societal governance standard, a governance standard where the state or the party is actually trying to correct the inequalities of capitalism. What does all that mean? Well, let me try and explain it. If you look at inequalities, I mean, China has a lot of problems. I mean, look at just the poor people. Li Keqiang said 2 years ago that there's still 600 million people living on less than 1,000 renminbi or yuan per month. That means less than $150 per month. So there's a lot of poor people. Of course, there's 600 million middle-class people by 2025, so you could say China is like half middle-class and half poor. No more extreme poor, but still a lot of poor people. And the wealth gap has grown. The Gini coefficient, or index like we say, is really something that measures, it's an index that measures how the inequality in a country is. And so the closer it is to zero, the more equal society is. If it's at zero, actually everybody has the exact same salary and exact same wealth. If it's at 1, it would theoretically, it's not possible of course, say that one person has all the money and wealth of the whole country, which is not possible. So going close to 0.5 actually is not a good thing. It should be closer to 0.2, 0.3. And so China really went from 0.27 to 0.47 over the past 30 years. It was even above the US at a certain point, which is at 0.48 right now. And now it's gone lower. It is slowing down. It is going down. And that's because the inequalities last years with the poor people or extreme poor people have been improved. But at the same time, it's still very, very high, much higher than most Western European democracies. And so this is a problem. And so China needs to get that gap smaller. Now the other thing has to do with, of course, the power of money. The rich people, the millionaires, the billionaires, the new rich middle class that is using that money to get more power. And that typically means they're not using it for society, or they're using it often against society. It means they're using their power to actually give other people just not too many chances, but make them even richer. And you see this with migrant workers that are challenged with a lot of rich people that are using their work or abusing their work hours. You saw this in the last years, and China has been cracking down on that a lot. But what you also see is that these rich people, but also rich companies, have been going into a lot of excesses. What that means is that China has been cracking down a lot on things like gaming. They've been cracking down on education technology companies, online education companies. They've been cracking down on Bitcoin mining. And why have they been doing that is primarily because of these excesses and addictive excesses that society, especially the poor and the vulnerable, have. It has to do with kids that are addicted to gaming. It has to do with poor parents that cannot pay for the education languages or education technology courses in order to get their kid into university exam or the university. It has to do with Bitcoin mining, where the poor regions of China, Mongolia and southwest of China and all these places where energy is cheap, for the people living in these poor areas, are being used for Bitcoin mining for the whole world and not for the poor people. And so these are just some examples. Of course, there's other reasons why this all happens, but reality is that China and the government and Beijing, the party, feels that the power of money should be somehow constrained because it's not always benefiting the people that should get benefits from that. Now, the other thing has to do with systemic challenges in China. And I talked a lot about it 2 weeks ago in an Evergrande video, so I'm not going to repeat that. But the reality is that many people in the lower middle class were buying apartments. They gave deposit all their savings from them and their family, and then suddenly these apartments could not be finished because Evergrande had too much debt and was growing just too fast, so they couldn't finish the apartments, which means people could lose their wealth. And what happened is that all these people, many thousand people, were really going towards the buildings of Evergrande and protesting. This was chaos. This was really a moment in time, and we've seen many of them, where the Chinese population was really angry. They were angry that the rich, the owner of Evergrande, was actually not taking care of what they have done, saved their whole life for an apartment, and then suddenly this guy was just having yachts and big planes, but they could not, maybe they would never be able to keep their wealth, their money. And so that's a big problem. And so if there's one thing that systemically China wants to avoid, is like chaos in the country. Definitely the party. And then there's the housing tax. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but the problem is that China's property tax is at 0. And so only a few cities are starting to experiment with new taxes, but they should tax these houses. The problem is that many of the people who bought these houses are either rich or very rich, and so they don't want to have this new tax law happening, and they're also in the government. So the same people that needs to vote for it or needs to accept it are actually the people who would have to pay it. This is a global problem, but in China, definitely this is why it's been so hard to implement. But more so, if you start taxing people that put all their savings into buying an apartment and all their salaries into keeping that apartment, they might not have a lot of money left to actually pay for more taxes because they're not really rich. Their money is stuck in bricks and mortar. So their money is in the apartment, the money is not on their saving account. And so this could be a problem. Anyway, it looks very clearly that China will increase the taxes to solve this problem. Then there's things like anti-money laundering. So this is about illegal money. This is where you see the crackdowns in China happening on casinos in Macau, but you're also seeing that people are buying art, but also why cryptocurrency is banned in China or the trading is banned. It's all to do with not letting that money from the rich people or the higher middle class leave the country. No, they should stay in the country in the way that it could benefit the people itself to actually make the country even richer. And then the giving back concept in China is very new. What we often forget about China when we think about China is that China's only opened for doing business for 40 years. It means most of the rich people are pretty young. They're young in age, because they've started maybe 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but they're also young in company-wise. And so these companies have not gotten used to yet that once they're really doing well and successful and have a lot of money, to actually give that money back to society, give that money to charity, like you see, for example, with Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. And I mean, there's a whole charity mentality in the US. In Europe, you have a lot of corporate social responsibility, and this is all very new for China. But the last years, it changed a lot. But this is systemically, it's also a problem in the way that the rich have been keeping their money or putting it overseas. And so this is something that needs to be challenged. But the common prosperity goal for China is really about avoiding the problems of capitalism. because they like capitalism in a way because it made China great. It made China rich. It made China wealthy. But the problem is that it has created polarization, specifically in the US, but also in Europe. We see it a lot. In the US, you have the polarization between poor and rich, black and white, between Republicans and Democrats, and I mean, whatever you want to think about, there's a lot of polarizations happening, and this is because of this inequality, because capitalism has no limits in the US very often, because it's a very individualistic society. And so China worries about that, being more collective or relationship society, that this would actually create too much chaos and put the system under too much stress, and maybe create a crisis. It's also about the extremes. I mean, the rich people, think about Jeff Bezos from Amazon. I mean, going to space, spending a few minutes there out in space, and then thanking his employees saying, well, thank you, I've done this little journey of a few minutes in space because of all your hard work, blood and sweat, and so this was a great moment for me. This was not the right message. And this really shows that somehow, even though it's cool to go in space and space exploration is important, it shows that he has no respect, or some of the rich people have no respect for the people that actually made them rich. And this is something that China sees as a problem of capitalism as well. There's a division, of course, between rich and poor, but also a lot of people that used to be in the middle class and now maybe are becoming homeless or have no money, just simply because the middle class is starting to collapse. And this was the strong point of America. Specifically after the Second World War, you saw America grow like crazy because the middle class was really building this America of the future. But that middle class is now squeezed in between more poor and the rich that are taking more money. And so the system is under so much stress that China feels that if they would continue fueling this capitalism on the American model, which of course they don't, then this is the problem they will have to face. Now, talking about common prosperity, this is not new in China. I mean, this is something from 2,500 years ago. Confucianists, it's really about the Book of Rights that was talking about this Xiaokang and Datong. And these two words really mean, Xiaokang means little health, or it means moderately prosperity, so like common prosperity, but moderately small, and Datong, that actually means the great unity, great harmony. And so Datong is actually something that China sees for, it's like utopia. This is like the dream of China, China's dream. And they've put a date on it, which is 2121, in 100 years from now, when the Communist Party is like 200 years old, where they want to achieve this utopian world where everybody's happy and lives in peace. And I mean, you know the story. But what really could happen is this Xiaokang. And Xiaokang, this really means about having a little bit similar moderate prosperity like in Western Europe in many countries. And they want to achieve that by 2050. And this is Xi Jinping's goal, really, to do that in the next 30 years. And so there's real plans to go into that. Now, it started already more than 100 years ago that they wanted, this word was used to say we now need to elevate our society. Of course, that didn't happen too quickly. With Mao, it was very ideological. It was about socialism, and it was very different. Today, with Xi Jinping, it's much more about the economy. It's much more about the quality of life of people in every aspect, including education, including culture, including healthcare, and so on. So that's what it's about. And Deng Xiaoping, of course, used it to elevate and say everybody can become rich, but then at one point you need to give it back, and that's the moment we're in now. And so Xiaokang is really a very important word because this prosperity or moderate prosperity is one of the key stepping stones towards that common prosperity. And talking about common prosperity, you could say there's like the 4 P's of common prosperity that we have to keep in mind. And the reason why China is so serious about it. It's about the past, so 2,500 years, but also the 70 plus years of communism and all the presidents of China reiterating it, but specifically since Xi Jinping, the last 2 years, you see the mentioning of the number of times he used that word has just gone exponential. So now now it's on the top of agenda. It's really part of the plan of China. It is in the policies, and we see it in the Central Economic Work Conference that we had just last week. We saw that it was used constantly as one of the main targets. So why do I say that this is a big trend? It's because China sees this as a big trend. And you could almost say, like what China said about the environment many years ago in 2015 in Paris, like we want to become really harmonious when it comes to living together with nature and not kill our nature. Well, we're now having that when it comes to common prosperity. And so it's not an important trend, but nobody's talking about it. Very few people are, because again, it's from the CPC. But what it isn't, and that's important to know, and that's my personal view, but what it isn't is actually what many people in the media, in the Western media, are talking about, that it's about the Communist Party taking from the rich. This is like a Robin Hood story where the Communist Party wants to keep control and just stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. That's not what it is, because China actually wants more people to become rich with this common prosperity. It's not about taking from the rich. And this is a narrative that, in my view, is very wrong. But of course, when we see all the crackdowns on Jack Ma, on Alibaba, on Meituan, on Didi, then we think that's the real goal. But the real goal is different. It's also not anti-capitalism, just simply because China wants this wealth and prosperous China to continue growing. So the model is okay, it's just the model has problems, and that's what they want to focus on. What it also isn't, and many people mention that, it's back to communism, it's back to egalitarianism, meaning everybody has the same, a Gini index or coefficient at 0. Everybody has the exact same thing. That's definitely not what it is. It's just that the gap between wealth and between rich and poor has to go smaller. And that makes sense. I mean, most wealthy countries want that as well. So every country wants that in itself. And so this is not about taking from the rich, distributing to everyone, having everybody the same, and killing the capitalist system. It's also not about China turning inward. Why am I saying this? Because China is turning inward, but China turning inward is more to do with self-dependency. It's to be not dependent on the US, on the high tech from outside China. This is not linked to common prosperity. It's not about, yeah, let's do it all together, we all have the same, we're all happy. No, that's not what it's about. It's about, let's open up so we can become even more rich, but at the same time, we need to make sure that nobody's left behind. And so what it really is about the rich changing their mindset. The mindset of charity that we have in the US, or of corporate social responsibility we have in many Western companies. It's that mindset that China wants. But they want to go even further. They want to instill this somehow like in 2,500 years of history, where it's really about the culture. It's about doing it collectively. This is not an individual decision of people to give back like Bill Gates does or Warren Buffett. No, because you cannot rely on that individual decision. You have to rely collectively that the mindset is changing to automatically give something back. And what it's all about is to make this pie bigger. And China's mentioning this word very often about this pie. And this is really what it is. So this is about fueling entrepreneurship. It's about fueling innovation. It's about fueling more rich people. This is about the middle class. So the rich have to give back somehow, the companies and the individuals, to make sure that the middle class and the poor can actually benefit. The middle class has to benefit in the way that they have to become richer. They have to also consume much more, which of course is not an easy task in China, because a lot of their money is in real estate and it's not per se into consumption, or they have their savings, and so that mentality needs to change. But the Chinese goal here with common prosperity is to have the top level, the rich people, give something back. The middle level actually has to go up by creating more opportunity for China, and the poor people, the workers, the migrants, the people doing the delivery work, these people that are working really hard, these are the ones that have to benefit from their work by making the rich richer and getting something back. So the rich have actually to help the people that made them rich to actually also go into the middle class. And that's the simple story. It's about the bottom up has to go up. It's not about the rich killing the rich. And so that's the story. That's what it is, common prosperity. Will it work? Well, that's the question nobody knows. How will it work? Well, that's something we can already say. If you look at the stepping stones, it's very clear. China this year, 2021, has been putting a lot of these stones in the water. They've been putting the stones, like we call it crackdowns in the West, but it's about anti-monopoly, about the fintech regulation, it's about all these excesses that need to be regulated, whether it's gaming or gambling, all these things. It's about privacy laws, about data laws. I mean, we've heard all these stories targeting the companies like Didi and Tencent and Alibaba and so on. These are the stones. And the mistake we're making is that we're looking at this as crackdowns. And very few people are looking at it as stones put into the water for then China to actually walk onto the path to common prosperity on the other side of the river. And so this is the message that we should have. Don't look at the stones, look actually as the pathway going towards the other side, which is Xiaokang. And then there's a lot of things that are happening today. Zhejiang province, where Alibaba is, Hangzhou, but also Yiwu, the biggest trading place in China, is actually becoming a pilot project for common prosperity. And so they have very, very clear goals. So these stepping goals are not just about these crackdowns, it's also about having achievable goals, KPIs you could say it, for certain cities. And the first province that is being used as a pilot is Zhejiang, to show that in 5 years from now, by 2025, they have increased their objectives or lowered the inequality between poor and rich in their own province. So they have clear targets, and they want to have a lot of things, like 100,000 entrepreneurs in the poor villages. They want to have life expectancy above 80% for the whole province, and so on. I mean, they're putting all these targets there because they want to show to Beijing, we have created a common prosperity in our province, or going into that direction. And Zhejiang is a very good example because they specifically have the advantage of being one of the richest provinces in China. So some areas, some districts in Hangzhou, where Alibaba is richer than countries like Sweden or Australia, or I mean, they're very, very rich. And so the rich are there, the poor are there as well in the province, so they can have this as a test case. And this is how China usually achieves new things. What they do is they let certain provinces, certain cities, take this as a pilot, and then whatever works, this will go national. The goals are for 2025, so if this happens after 2025, the 15th five-year plan, we can expect, if it's successful, that this will get rolled out, this whole standard, over the whole China. Now, the other thing is about capital controls, and I think this is interesting. There's two things happening there. One thing is that China is relocating a lot of its big tech companies to the mainland or Hong Kong on stock exchange, and this is happening automatically. Also, the US is pushing them out a little bit, but the reality is China wants to have the capital, so the people of China, the Chinese middle class, invest in local companies locally, and not just all the Westerners. Of course, this transition will be very painful, will not be easy, but the reality is they want to have the capital within China for the Chinese, and that have the Chinese benefit from it, which means have more capital markets rather than a real estate market or an investment market from an infrastructure point of view, so that the country doesn't grow purely on investment, but also grows from financial growth. And then the other thing is the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, which is going to get launched in February, probably with the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Because that is very interesting. When the whole China goes digital with a central bank digital currency, it's not just that the unbanked can be banked and that it's all digital, and of course it's more controllable, but what's interesting, you could put meta tax on this currency. What that means is that you can say, for example, to Jack Ma or to rich companies like, okay, this central bank digital currency, you have to spend it in certain goals that is good for society. And when they do a pledge to do that, actually the bank can check it. The government can check it because they know it's digital now. It's not just paper money. And so this is a very different way of looking at it. But I believe the digital currency that China is bringing out will bring prosperous society because it's more controllable, that this is actually flowing back to the lower end of society. Now, will it work is a question everybody's asking. And I have no idea. The only thing I do know is that China is trying to make it work. And so I think we should at least watch it because it's important to see that trend happening. I think two things will work and two things will be very difficult. What will work, in my view, is that mindset change with the rich people. It's not because the rich don't want to give to others in China. It's just because this mindset has been around for 2,500 years, and somehow China is now embedding this into the modern society. And so what I believe is that the rich giving back and the companies giving back to societal improvement and prosperity and wealth is not going to be that hard. It's not going to be that hard because they understand that their market is China. Most of the successful companies in China have their biggest market in China. And so they're kind of stuck, you would say. And so their mindset will have to change unless they go global and forget about China. But there's very few companies that can afford that. And the second thing is that it's a new model. And I believe that new model is not that disruptive. What it means is that if you think about pollution tax, for example, people can pollute everywhere in the world. People are polluting everywhere in the world, and companies are polluting. But they get taxed on it. If you pollute more, you have to pay more. This is the model and the system and the mindset that everybody in the world is now having, every country. And so put that model of pollution against these companies now into a model of doing good for society or creating common prosperity or inclusion into that new model, and you have the exact same thing. What it means is that companies like an Alibaba, a Tencent, or any big company, a BYD, if they want to show to Beijing that they're doing good, they have to be more inclusive. They have to do programs that are very inclusive. And so this is what you see. Tencent has been spending billions of dollars now, Alibaba as well, but every company starting, it looks like they're all giving money away to the poor and to inclusion. But this is more about them feeling that this has to be part of their business plan. Just like carbon reduction has to be part of the business plan of every company today. And so it's not that disruptive, it's just new. Today, I mean, companies are also talking about this societal inclusion as being part of a CSR plan. But in China, this is going to get an as high importance as carbon reduction. And so that's why I think this is doable. It's just going to cost some money. It means the valuation of these companies will go down, but at the same time, if China can become richer because of that, the middle class can grow. Many of these companies will earn even more money afterwards because they got more customers. But to do that, there's two other things. These customers have to consume more. And so that's the real problem. Consumption growth to replace infrastructure growth and investment growth is something the government has been trying for 20 years. And it's not easy. If you look at the disposable income in China last year, 2020, I mean, it's only been growing for 1%, while the country has been growing for 6%. So the consumption is still the big problem. And so Chinese still like to save or invest rather than consume because they're still worried about that future. And so that middle class, even if it becomes bigger, they need to start consuming much more percentage-wise. And so that's not sure that will happen. If that won't happen, then maybe all bets are off. And the other thing is they need to find a new engine of growth, China. So real estate, definitely that's going to end. That's not the engine of growth anymore. Infrastructure is not the engine of growth anymore. They cannot just export it on the Belt and Road to the rest of the world and have everybody else pay for it. That's also not sustainable. So they need to find new markets. And one of them is, of course, the green or renewable energy market. And my feeling is that China really sees this as an opportunity. Now, the US with Biden sees this as an opportunity as well for unemployment, or to solve the unemployment issue or get more employment, but also to fuel industry, the economy and so on. And China's the same. But I think China's better placed. If you look at solar panels, wind energy, I mean, they're producing more than anywhere in the world. And I think China is going to become the green factory of the world in the next 5 to 10 years. And everything we're going to buy to reach our target of CO2 norms anywhere in the world, these products will come from China, whether it's electrical vehicles or whether it's refrigerators or whatever it is, solar panels, it will all come from China. And the reason is simply because they will become the factory of the green world of tomorrow, because that's their only way actually to create, or one of the main ways to create, that new engine of growth. And so I believe it could become a new socialist model. And that's why I think we should pay a lot of attention to it. If it fails, well, then the whole world will see, you see, this was something from the Communist Party, Xi Jinping said it, and basically it was again propaganda. But even if it fails, it will have made China more inclusive, which in itself is a good thing. If it fails, at least the renewable energy and a lot of new things will have changed to make it a more healthy society. Maybe not the Xiaokang that we want, or that China wants, but it will go into the right direction. But if it succeeds, which also has a chance, it could become a new socialist model for the world. And that means a lot of countries in the world will look at China and say, wow, if you can make the country richer, more wealthy, more prosperous, and at the same time not leave anyone behind, I mean, that's like the perfect master plan. And this is Xi Jinping's master plan. If he will achieve it or not, we'll probably know in 5, 10 or 20 years from now. But that is also why I believe he will stay on for at least another 5 to 10 years, just to see if his model worked.